Hey guys, tonight we're slipping off our sneakers, tossing aside our texting thumbs, and heading back to a time when dating involved far fewer emojis and far more mud. You're standing in the heart of a medieval village square, hem of your tunic soaked, dodging a donkey cart while trying to make eye contact with someone across a cabbage stall. This is romance, 1300 style. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you tuning in from, and what time is it there? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across the slushy village commons, your boots sticky with muck and horse droppings. It's market day, which means this is your only real chance to socialize. And by socialize, I mean lock eyes with someone from 2 stalls over while pretending to admire dried fish. That's how most relationships begin here. Not with dating apps or blind dates, but with stolen glances between barrels of onions. You see her hands powdered with flour, holding a basket of root vegetables like it's the medieval equivalent of a Gucci tote. You nod. She looks away. That's a full-on flirtation now. Because medieval dating, especially among peasants, was less candlelit dinners and more like, hey, you're also still alive after last winter? Let's talk. There's no set ritual. You meet people through errands, church, or family events. And if your family doesn't hate them and they own at least one chicken, things might move fast. And it had to move fast sometimes. Life expectancy was short. People weren't waiting until 30 to settle down. If you liked someone, you had to act before the next famine, war, or surprise monastery vow took them out of the game. Still, you couldn't be too bold. Public decency was a big deal. Even holding hands in public might raise eyebrows, especially if the local priest was around. But there were loopholes. Historians point out that markets and fairs were some of the few spaces where young, unmarried men and women could interact more freely. Some even called these bustling places the original dating arenas. Now, you're eyeing the apple cart, pretending to inspect produce while sneaking glances at her again. She glances back. Maybe. It's hard to tell. There's a sheep in the way. But the possibilities are thrilling. You imagine helping her carry her goods home, maybe sharing a crust of bread on her doorstep. And if you're really lucky, she might offer you ale. Mainstream history tells us peasants didn't date so much as negotiate partnerships, often very casually, often very fast. There weren't rules, at least not written ones, but unspoken customs shaped every move. If you helped someone bring in the harvest, for example, it wasn't just manual labor, it could be a signal of interest. Or it could just be manual labor. That's the mystery. Now, your mother spots you dawdling. She's already suspicious. In her mind, your job today is to bring back salted pork, not moon over the girl with the braids near the cheese stand. You feel her eyes burn holes in the back of your head, and suddenly, flirting becomes a high-stakes game of parental hide-and-seek. This is where things get complicated. Families were deeply involved in pairing people off. In some villages, matchmaking was semi-formal, elders or parents whispered, gossiped, and arranged convenient introductions. But you want romance, not arrangements. So you find yourself caught in that timeless teenage dilemma. Follow your heart or avoid your mother's wrath. There's also a fair bit of superstition guiding your crush. Say you find a stray ribbon on the ground. If it's red, local law says you might soon fall in love. If it's black, you're doomed to heartbreak. These little signs and omens guide how people see relationships, sort of like horoscopes, but with more goat entrails. Historians still argue whether most medieval couples actually dated in any way we'd recognize. Some claim the lower classes simply drifted into relationships through shared labor and mutual convenience. Others believe there was more subtlety, more actual courtship, especially in close-knit villages where everyone knew everyone and reputation mattered. Speaking of subtlety, ever tried flirting while your siblings hover 3 feet away at all times? Privacy isn't exactly abundant. Your family probably shares a one-room hut. So even if things progress, let's say she smiles back and drops a hint you might walk her home, you've got to do it with half the town watching. And yet, that's part of the appeal. Every moment matters more. A wink carries weight. A shared joke over goat cheese might be the height of intimacy for the week. There's no texting afterward to clarify if it was flirting. There's just suspense. And sometimes, a lot of miscommunication. Still, hope bubbles up like stew on a fire. You think about returning next week, same stall, same mud, maybe with a flower tucked in your belt. If you can find one not already trampled by livestock. That's medieval dating. Raw, fleeting, muddy, and strangely charming. It's about carving out human connection in a world filled with toil, tradition, and turnips. And if you're lucky, really lucky, she might give you her last apple. That's basically a marriage proposal. You're back at the market again, only this time, you've come prepared. Your hair is combed, well, less tangled. You borrowed your father's best wool tunic, and you're carrying a bundle of herbs from your family's garden, which you absolutely did not steal from your neighbor's fence. They're meant as a gift, subtle, harmless. But in medieval times, herbs carry meanings. Give someone rosemary, and you're basically whispering, "Remember me." Offer rue, and, well, you might be cursing their crops. Tread carefully. Courtship, as it turns out, isn't just about liking someone. It's a public performance. It has rules, unspoken, but rigid. Everyone is watching. Your parents, their parents, the village priest, and 3 nosy grandmothers who somehow know every single thing about your life. If you so much as glance too long, rumors will sprout like mildew on a damp tunic. This time, though, you do more than glance. You smile. She smiles. And then comes the first real test of courtship customs, the casual conversation. Not a modern DM. No hey with 7ys. Just you, nervously commenting on the weather while your heart punches your ribs. She replies with something about her family's bread-winning first prize at the harvest festival, which is either a boast or a coded flirt, depending on interpretation. You both linger near the bread cart, and that, apparently, is enough for one of those grandmothers to whisper to her neighbor that something's brewing. It isn't, of course, but in medieval villages, reputations spread faster than the Black Death. One chat, and suddenly your aunt is asking if you've found a wife yet. No pressure. You learn quickly that courting means managing not just your feelings, but everyone else's. Your family may expect a match that brings land or livestock. Hers might want someone who can read, or at least count to 20 without removing shoes. And then there are dowries, those complicated, sometimes comically mismatched exchanges of wealth that accompany marriage. Here's where things get transactional. If you're poor, you might not have land or coin to offer. So you promise your labor. I'll tend your family's sheep, you might say. Or I'll build you a fence. It's oddly romantic, in a back-breaking kind of way. Imagine offering someone free landscaping for life in place of flowers. That's real love. But even with labor promises, you'll need a chaperone if things get serious. That's right. If you're meeting alone too often, folks will talk. So you walk together after Mass, in public, under the suspicious gaze of Brother Matthew, who's pretending to be very interested in a patch of moss. It's wholesome surveillance. Historians still debate whether love played a central role in medieval pairings. Some believe marriage was entirely practical, based on economics, land, and fertility. Others argue that affection did matter, especially among peasants who had slightly more social wiggle room than the nobility. But either way, emotions had to be balanced with strategy. You're starting to realize that this isn't just about liking someone, it's about proving your worth. She's assessing your posture, your work ethic, your ability to not fall into a pigsty every time you walk. You're assessing her ability to carry water, knead dough, and possibly withstand 6 childbirths in 10 years. It's less notebook, more Oregon Trail, survival mode. That doesn't mean there's no fun. At seasonal festivals, May Day, for instance, you finally get some freedom. There's dancing, games, and maybe a cheeky chase around the maypole. These are rare moments when flirting is allowed, encouraged, even. You grab her hand in a circle dance and your skin burns where you touch. This is as close to PDA as it gets, and it's glorious. But festivals also come with matchmaking pressure. Sometimes, elders will push couples together through dances or games like Catch the Garter, which sounds flirty but also occasionally ends in a sprained ankle. You pretend not to notice when your mother corners her aunt for a friendly chat. The village suddenly feels like a medieval version of The Bachelor, only with fewer roses and more barley. And then comes the question of intentions. If you keep seeing her, at Mass, at the well, behind the stables, you'll eventually be expected to make things formal. That usually means a betrothal, a kind of pre-marriage engagement, sometimes sealed with gifts or even a hand-fasting ceremony. But you're still unsure. You like her, yes, but you're 17. You still want to finish carving that wooden flute. Maybe chase a dream of becoming the town's next pig breeder. Or not die of pneumonia. You're not ready for 10 children and a thatched roof collapsing under snow. Still, pressure mounts. And worse, rumors start. Remember that quick chat by the bread cart? Now it's somehow ballooned into a full-blown "they're promised" narrative. You overhear someone say you're buying a wedding chicken. You don't even own a chicken. It's not all bad, though. That attention gives your flirtation a strange legitimacy. Her brothers, who once glared at you, now offer awkward nods. Her father stops sharpening his axe when you approach. That's progress. Meanwhile, you prepare your first real gift, a woven belt. It's handmade, took you 3 afternoons, and it's just humble enough to avoid suspicion of overconfidence. When you hand it to her, she blushes. Or maybe she's just sunburnt. You'll never know. You're caught between tradition and personal desire, unsure which will win. It's not about falling head over heels. It's about balancing community, expectation, and the terrifying mystery of romance with someone who may or may not find your belt impressive. You start to wonder, is this what love feels like? Or is it just indigestion from that old will of cheese? Either way, you keep showing up. Keep bringing herbs. Keep letting your eyes linger just a little longer. And now, you're standing in front of her father. He's not smiling. His beard could house a small family of mice, and his arms are crossed in a way that says, "I have opinions about you." You shift your weight. Try to meet his gaze without looking like you're challenging him to a duel. This is a moment of intent, and in medieval courtship, that's almost as serious as war. You're not here to propose, yet, but rather to express your honorable interest. That's the phrase. You've rehearsed it in your head while shearing sheep. But now your mouth has gone dry. You blurt something about how lovely the weather is and how his daughter has strong hands. Not ideal, but you power through. This stage is a minefield. In noble families, suitors often had to submit a formal petition or letter, usually vetted by parents, priests, or even political allies. For common folk like you, it's less scripted but just as loaded. A bad first impression can mean exile from her porch forever. No pressure. Her father finally grunts something about how her last suitor lost a toe in the mill. You're not sure if that's a threat or just unfortunate local trivia. Either way, he allows you to join them for supper. That's progress. You step inside their cottage and immediately trip over a dog the size of a large bread loaf. So smooth. At dinner, the entire family is watching. Her mother piles your plate suspiciously high, perhaps testing your appetite as a measure of manliness. Her younger brother pokes your elbow repeatedly with a wooden spoon. You spill a bit of stew. You try not to cry. Overall, a solid B+ performance. After dinner, you're allowed a short walk with her. Chaperoned, of course. Her older sister trails behind, pretending not to eavesdrop. You talk about the harvest. You make her laugh with a joke about a cow who thinks it's a priest. It barely makes sense, but laughter is currency. And now, the game deepens. Because intentions must lead somewhere, and fast. Otherwise, tongues wag. People start assuming something illicit is happening. Remember, even holding hands too long can brand you as morally suspect. In medieval villages, the line between affection and scandal is about 3 seconds long. So you consider proposing a troth plight, a mutual promise to marry. It's not legally binding yet, but it's a public vow that says, we're headed there. Some couples exchange tokens, like rings, belts, or in one documented case, a spoon. Romance was weird. Others sealed it with a kiss, but only in private. Public smooching would earn you a visit from the parish constable, or worse, the local gossips. But here's the twist. You don't always get to choose. Parents might intervene. If your family suddenly needs to secure an alliance with a neighbor's farmland, you could be yanked from this budding romance and shoved towards someone named Agnes who smells like turnip soup and distrusts laughter. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants had much say in their marriages. Some sources suggest surprising freedom, especially in smaller, less feudal communities. Others paint a bleaker picture, where love bowed to economics, inheritance, and social order. The truth, probably, lies somewhere in between. Still, you press on. Your affection is genuine, and you sense hers is too. One day, while walking back from the river, she gives you a woven ribbon from her hair. You act casual, but your heart is throwing a medieval rave. This isn't just a token, it's a signal. A green light. Now you need your family's blessing. This is where things get really awkward. You have to convince your parents that she's the right match, that she works hard, comes from a respectable family, and, if you're lucky, might bring a small dowry. You mention the ribbon. Your mother eyes it like it's a cursed relic, but your father seems amused. They agree to meet her family. It's not a binding contract, but it's the medieval version of let's set up a Zoom. You breathe easier, until you realize you're about to enter the world of betrothal negotiations. And oh boy, is that a labyrinth. The two families sit together, not quite smiling, definitely not joking. They discuss practical matters, land, tools, goats. You nod solemnly while trying not to sneeze from the hay in your tunic. Someone mentions a small field your family owns. Someone else counters with a prized chicken. At one point, you're pretty sure your entire future gets traded for a shovel and a promise to help repair a fence. Meanwhile, she sits quietly, hands folded, barely making eye contact. That's the norm. Courtship is more about family politics than personal comfort. Women's voices aren't always heard in these deals, especially if dowries or inheritances are involved. And while your love is real, the system often feels anything but romantic. Still, she sneaks you a glance. You respond with a nervous half-smile. It's like Morse code across a sea of stern eyebrows. You reach an agreement. Or rather, your parents do. A date is set for a formal betrothal ceremony. It'll be held after the feast of St. Swithin, once the roads are less muddy and the neighbors have stopped arguing about the missing pig. That night, you lie in your straw mattress, staring at the rafters. You're officially halfway to marriage. It feels surreal. You're 17. You still laugh when someone says mutton. But now you're expected to build a home, raise children, maybe even join the village council one day. Is this love? Or just a sequence of obligations disguised as romance? Maybe both. You clutch the ribbon from her hair, still fragrant with rosemary. And you hope, truly hope, that she's staring at her ceiling too, wondering if this future you're stumbling into might actually be a good one. The day of the betrothal ceremony arrives with the unmistakable scent of roasted onions and barely restrained anxiety. You're wearing your best tunic and someone has tried to tame your hair with what smells like lard and lavender. The village bell rings out across the fields, summoning friends, neighbors, and nosy people who just want to see if anyone faints. This isn't the wedding yet, but make no mistake. A public declaration. An emotional contract. A medieval version of Facebook official, but with more bread and fewer passive-aggressive comments. The crowd gathers outside the parish church, even though the event itself happens in the yard. Only real weddings get to happen inside. You're nervous. She's nervous. Her mother is praying silently. Your father is adjusting his belt like it's about to be auctioned. And then, in front of everyone, you take her hand. A priest, or sometimes just a respected elder, recites the traditional words, the promises to marry, the conditions discussed by your families, and maybe a reading from the Book of Tobit, because nothing says romance like angels scaring demons out of bedrooms. You repeat your vows. She repeats hers. And together, you both place hands over a Bible and swear. Betrothal ceremonies, especially from the 12th century onward, were semi-binding. Breaking them could result in social disgrace, fines, or in extreme cases, church court. The ecclesiastical courts got involved in everything from broken promises to whether someone had touched another person with intent. Wild times. As a symbol of the betrothal, you give her a token. A simple silver ring, or if you're less well off, perhaps a braided bracelet or a ribbon with embroidered initials. Some couples exchanged knives. One record from York describes a man giving his fiancée a small live pig. Nothing says eternal love like something that squeals when touched. There's food afterward. Not a feast, exactly, but enough for people to get crumbs on their tunics and argue about the stew's salt content. You catch glimpses of her across the fire pit. You don't speak much, because in this stage, everyone's watching, but your smiles carry full paragraphs. From this moment forward, your lives are officially intertwined. Any other romantic flirtations are off the table. You're expected to remain faithful, even though you're not technically married yet. That's the weird part. You're not fully married, but breaking this bond would be treated like adultery. And now the preparations begin. In the weeks that follow, there's talk of bans. The formal public announcements read out during church services on 3 consecutive Sundays before the wedding. They go something like, "If anyone knows a reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now." You always feel like someone's going to leap up yelling, "She stole my chicken," but it never happens. Probably because chickens aren't worth jewels. Probably. These bans are your village's version of background checks. They allow people to object. Maybe one of you is secretly already married, or you're related. Medieval family trees can be untrimmed. If no one objects, the green light glows brighter. Meanwhile, your families start to prepare the dowry and dower arrangements. The dowry is what her family gives to help the couple start off. Maybe some livestock, a chest of linens, or coins. The dower is what your family pledges in case you die first. So she's not left penniless and forced to marry someone who smells like boiled radish. Both are practical, and both are quietly negotiated behind closed doors while you and your fiancé make vague small talk about goat prices. Historians still argue whether dowries empowered women or simply turned them into economic pawns. On one hand, a large dowry could give a woman more influence in her marriage. On the other, it could also reduce her to a ledger entry. But in many peasant communities, the system was more fluid. People gave what they could. Sometimes it was a few hens and a woven shawl. Sometimes, just good reputation. You begin building, or fixing, the home you'll live in together. Maybe it's a modest cottage on the edge of your family's land. You thatch the roof, reinforce the walls with wattle and daub, and try not to scream every time a spider the size of your thumb appears. If you're lucky, neighbors help out. It becomes a community project. Someone brings ale. Someone else sings a tune about a frog who wants to marry a duck. It makes no sense. Everyone's a little tipsy. She visits occasionally, chaperoned of course, to offer opinions about where the firewood stack should go and whether you actually plan to hang the herbs above the hearth instead of next to the chamber pot. You nod seriously and change everything she mentions. This is her home too, after all. And secretly, you like when she's around. The whole place feels warmer. But not everyone's thrilled. There's an older neighbor who insists your generation is ruining marriage. Claims people don't take the rituals seriously anymore. That in his day, men waited 5 years to even see a woman's ankle. You smile politely and nod, thinking about how you've seen your fiancé laugh, cry, curse, and once fight off a goose with a ladle. Ankle exposure feels like the least meaningful thing about your bond. As the wedding date nears, so do the whispered warnings. You're told to avoid seeing her too often, lest you tempt fate. Some folks believe too much familiarity before the wedding invites misfortune. Others think pre-wedding dreams about your spouse-to-be are prophetic. One local woman swears she dreamed of frogs before her marriage and ended up raising 8 children who all croaked when they laughed. That tracks. You also learn about Charivari, a bizarre tradition in some regions where the community would create a raucous, clanging procession outside the homes of mismatched or disliked couples. It was basically medieval trolling. You try not to take it personally when your uncle sharpens a ladle just in case. Still, as your wedding day inches closer, the excitement builds. You're on the edge of something immense. Terrifying, yes, but also beautiful. You lie awake some nights, staring at the rafters again, thinking about the promises you've made, the people who've watched, the prayers whispered, the stew spilled, and the ribbon, now kept in a wooden box you carved yourself. You're not there yet, but you're getting close. The morning of your wedding arrives, and everything smells like bread and cold sweat. You barely sleep. Maybe it's nerves. Maybe it's because 3 of your cousins stayed over and snored in harmony like haunted goats. Either way, the sun is rising, and today's the day you stop being someone's child and become someone's spouse. There's no backing out now. Well, there is, but you'd be chased through the village with a wheel of stale cheese. Weddings in medieval times weren't the white-laced cathedral affairs you might imagine. They weren't usually held inside the church. In fact, most marriages happened right outside the church doors, on the porch steps. Why? Because it was public, visible, and symbolic. You're entering into holy matrimony before entering the house of God. Medieval people loved a good metaphor. You're dressed in your best again, this time with extra sprigs of rosemary tucked into your belt, which supposedly ward off evil and also make you smell like a well-seasoned roast. Your friends nudge you and make jokes about the big night. You laugh like you understand, even though your half-sure marriage just means sharing porridge and arguing over firewood. She arrives, and she looks different. Not in a bad way, just ethereal. Her hair's been braided with ribbons, her tunic pressed, her cheeks flushed either from blush or nerves, or both. She meets your eyes and offers a tiny smile. That's all it takes to steady your heart. The priest begins the ceremony. It's short, practical, a few prayers, a declaration of intent. The big moment is the handfasting. Your hands are tied together with a cord or ribbon, symbolizing your union. It's where we get the phrase, tying the knot. You try not to make a joke about that out loud, but your brain whispers, forever tethered, hope she likes your snoring. As you exchange vows, someone coughs loudly, probably your uncle, always at the emotional climax. Then comes the giving of the dowry. Her father presents a chest of linens, a sack of barley, and, surprise, a pair of ducks. You nod solemnly. You weren't expecting ducks. She looks just as confused. This might become an inside joke later. Remember our wedding ducks, you'll say. She'll laugh. You'll both wonder where they ended up. In return, your family offers their dower agreement. In case you die, hopefully not soon, she'll receive a portion of land or goods. It's less romantic than poetry, but it's security. And in a world where mortality rates made coin tosses look stable, that kind of foresight mattered. There's a final blessing, and suddenly, you're married. No kiss. That's a modern addition. In fact, kissing in public was borderline scandalous in many places. Instead, there's a nod, a smile, maybe a handshake if you're particularly bold. Then everyone claps. Someone throws flower petals, or cabbage leaves. Depends on the season. And then, the party. Medieval wedding feasts could last hours, or days, depending on how wealthy the families were. Yours? Somewhere in the middle. There's music from a local fiddler who plays everything at the speed of a startled squirrel. There's bread, cheese, dried meats, ale, and something unidentifiable that jiggles ominously. People dance. Not the elegant waltzes of future centuries, more like rhythmic stomping and strategic clapping. You try to join in but nearly knock over a small child and apologize profusely. Your new wife helps you regain rhythm. That, you think, might be love. As the day fades, older women pull her aside to whisper advice. Some of it sounds alarming. One gives her a jar of herbs with a wink. You're too afraid to ask what's in it. You, meanwhile, get a lot of firm slaps on the back and comments like, "Now your real work begins." Nobody explains what that means. You assume they mean chopping firewood. Hopefully. Now comes the bedding ceremony. And before your heart starts pounding, no, it's not as terrifying as it sounds. In noble households, it was sometimes absurdly public. Friends escorting the couple to bed, throwing them in, and watching until a shoe was flung. Thankfully, you're not nobility. In your village, it's mostly symbolic. A few elders lead you both to your cottage. A song is sung. A toast is made. And then everyone leaves, giggling like drunk hens. You sit beside her in the dim light of the fire. Neither of you says much at first. Then she laughs, quiet, warm, and tells you she's glad the ducks didn't bite anyone. You smile back. She removes the ribbon from her hair, the same one she once gave you, ties it around your wrist. So you won't forget, she says. Forget? How could you? This day has etched itself into your bones. Historians still debate how affectionate medieval marriages really were. Some argue they were mostly practical, built on survival, economy, and social pressure. Others believe that even within those boundaries, real love often bloomed. There are letters, poems, and court testimonies that hint at tenderness, at loyalty, at shared laughter over badly cooked stew and frost-bitten mornings. You lie beside her, eyes on the thatched roof you mended with your own hands. Outside, the ducks quack softly in the pen. Somewhere, a fiddler is still playing, probably drunk now. And inside this quiet room, two people begin a story neither truly understands, but both are ready to tell. No more courtship, no more rituals, just one shared life. Morning hits like a damp cloth to the face. You wake up to pale sunlight dripping through the shutters, the smell of smoke and fresh hay lingering in the air. Beside you, she's still half asleep, curled into the blanket like a burrito with hair. You lie there for a while, quietly marveling at how something as ordinary as breathing can feel extraordinary now. Then the rooster crows, the ducks quack, yes, the wedding ducks survive the night, and reality knocks. Being married in the Middle Ages isn't a gentle glide into domestic bliss. It's a plunge into shared responsibility, whispered prayers, and figuring out which corner of the room is best for storing dried leeks. Gone are the shy glances and supervised walks through the market. Now it's who mends the cloak, who fetches water, and who scrubs the soot off the cauldron because someone, you, forgot to lift it before the fire burned out. You're not just lovers now. You're an economic unit, a survival pact, a team in a game where the weather, illness, and bad harvests all want you to lose. The daily rhythm kicks in fast. You rise with the light, say a quick prayer, then go your separate ways. You to the fields or workshop, she to the hearth, garden, or market stall. Unless she joins you in the fields, which, let's be honest, she often does. Most peasants didn't have the luxury of rigid gender roles. If someone could lift a pail, they lifted it. If they could churn butter, they churned. Everyone did what had to be done. Even the ducks probably had a side hustle. But just because you're married doesn't mean privacy becomes abundant. Medieval homes often had just one or two rooms. Maybe a small loft if you were lucky. Walls? Curtains? Personal space? These were theoretical luxuries. You learned to whisper in corners, to pass love notes disguised as shopping lists, to hold hands under the table during mealtime prayers. And while many modern couples have arguments over thermostat settings, you two might squabble about whether to salt the cheese curds before or after pressing. Domestic bliss has never been without its stumbles. Despite the simplicity, moments of genuine tenderness sneak in. A shared slice of warm bread, a stolen nap in the hayloft, a whispered joke about your neighbor's bizarre hat feather collection. These tiny rituals, seemingly meaningless, become the glue of your marriage. You find yourselves building traditions, planting garlic on certain days, always eating stew on Thursdays, feeding the ducks leftover crumbs and assigning them absurd names like Sir Quackalot. Some evenings, you visit the local alehouse. Not often and not extravagantly. It's more about the music, the gossip, and the warmth of community. She goes sometimes too. Women weren't barred from alehouses in most villages, especially not the ones brewing and selling the stuff. In fact, many medieval women were alewives, skilled at fermentation and fierce negotiators. The tavern becomes your version of a date night. Loud, smoky, with the occasional brawl over dice, but full of life. The church remains ever present in your union. Every Sunday, you attend Mass together, kneeling side by side on cold stone floors, reciting prayers in Latin you half understand. Religion isn't a side dish in your marriage. It's the broth everything floats in. Saints are invoked during illnesses. Crosses are sketched above doorways. You keep a relic of Saint Margaret to protect future childbirths. Or was it Saint Juliana? Either way, they're all booked solid for miracle requests. Speaking of children, yes, that's the next expectation. People assume you'll start producing tiny, muddy offspring almost immediately. And truthfully, you hope for it too. Children are joy, labor, legacy, and pension plan all rolled into one. But fertility isn't guaranteed, even in a world where people marry young. If conception takes time, the whispers begin. Aunties offer potions. Priests suggest penance. A local wise woman recommends placing dried foxglove under the bed. You're skeptical. Historians still argue whether medieval people actually wanted large families or simply accepted them as fate. Some records suggest strong affection between parents and children. Others show a more utilitarian attitude, especially when infant mortality was so high. But behind the data, you know that hope and heartbreak live side by side in every couple's quiet conversations at night. There are days when your marriage feels like a blessing. Other days, like two oxen hitched to the same crooked plough. Sometimes she frustrates you by rearranging the grain storage for the third time. You frustrate her by tracking mud inside after she just swept. Arguments happen. Over chores, over money, over who forgot to feed Sir Quackalot. But the thing that keeps you steady isn't romance. It's commitment. The medieval kind. The kind that sees you through famine, through fire, through winters so cold your nose hairs freeze. And yes, there are couples who fall apart. The church might frown on divorce, but annulments happen. Desertion happens. Infidelity happens, though it's a serious accusation and punishable by public shaming, or worse. You try not to become one of those couples. You talk things through, or you sulk silently for a week, depending on whose turn it is. You mark your first anniversary not with cake, but with a shared look across the yard as your roof withstands its first storm. No one claps. No one gives gifts. But when she pats your shoulder and says, "Good work on the shingles," it feels like fireworks. In a world where plagues knock on doors and wolves howl too close to the village edge, love is less about flowers and more about staying alive together. It's in the way she patches your shirt without comment. In the way you save the last dried fig for her. In the way you face each morning knowing that, for all the chaos outside your cottage door, inside, there's partnership. Marriage in the Middle Ages isn't about fairy tales. It's about duck feathers in your bedding, shared chores, silent prayers, and the occasional laugh when the soup tastes like shoe leather and neither of you knows why. But somehow, it works. Your neighbor's daughter just got married, and the village can't stop talking about how fast it happened. 2 weeks from handshake to hand fasting, quicker than bread rising on a cold day. You sip from your wooden mug and listen, amused. But somewhere in your mind, you remember your own whirlwind and smile. Love, or at least marriage, moves fast in a world where time is rarely promised. Tonight, though, you're not thinking about other couples. Tonight, you're at the seasonal village gathering, a midsummer feast meant to celebrate a good planting and coax good fortune from the soil. There's music, firelight, and the comforting weight of her hand in yours. You two still haven't figured out the dancing part, but you've learned to sway without stepping on each other's toes. Well, mostly. Events like these are more than just parties. They're how couples signal their standing in the community. How you appear, your clothing, your behavior, even how closely you sit, says more than words ever could. Gossip is as common as hay. So when she laughs at your joke about the pie being historically inaccurate, people notice. And when you kiss her hand before the music starts, the older couples nudge each other and murmur that they'll last, those two. Still, married life isn't just about festivities and fieldwork. It's also about navigation, specifically, social navigation. In a small medieval village, your relationships with your in-laws, neighbors, the reeve, and even the alewife all affect your household stability. You need to manage disputes carefully, especially ones that involve land or livestock. Remember last winter when your goats trampled your neighbor's herbs? You still owe him a favor and one particularly apologetic cheese wheel. Love is tested not just in silence and sickness, but in public diplomacy. That said, marriage also meant joining your partner's social orbit. Her best friend becomes your ally or adversary, depending on how well you remember her name and if you accidentally insulted her embroidery. Your brother now becomes her chore-sharing backup. When he brings over firewood, she thanks him with a loaf of bread. You all pretend it's not transactional, but let's be honest, everything in medieval life kind of is. What's curious is how quickly the world starts seeing you not as two individuals, but as a unit. People speak to you both, invite you both, judge you both. If one of you shows up to church late, the other's name gets dragged into the whispers. He's been sleeping in, they say. Must be too much ale. Or worse, they're fighting. You learn fast that appearances matter. Harmony must be performed, even when you're mad because someone left the butter out and it melted into a sad puddle. But even beneath the performance, there's real warmth. There's a particular moment when you're both fixing the garden fence. A storm had knocked it sideways. She's knee-deep in mud, laughing at your futile attempts to wedge a post straight. Then, without ceremony, she wipes your face with the sleeve of her tunic. Your tunic, technically, but she wears it better. And in that one absurd, mucky moment, it hits you how fond you've grown. Historians still argue how common love was in medieval marriages. Letters from the gentry suggest deep affection. Songs and poems hint at passion. But records from peasant households are scarce. Maybe love wasn't written, it was lived. In the way she saves the better part of the stew for you. In the way you repair her sandals before your own. In the jokes no one else hears. Love, in your case, isn't thunder. It's a well-built fence. A shared silence. A bruise you got carrying a bundle of rushes because she was too tired. The seasons change, as they always do. Your first year together becomes your second. Then third. You both grow a little more lined around the eyes. Your roles sharpen. She takes over candle making. You handle bartering in town. You build routines like they're a second home. And slowly, your love, your strange, messy, patchwork love, settles into something that feels like moss on stone. Quiet, durable, oddly comforting. And now children. Yes, the inevitable. After a few false starts and many whispered prayers, you finally welcome a child into your world. It's not as dramatic as a modern delivery room, but it is dramatic by medieval standards. Neighbors come to help. Midwives arrive with bundles of herbs. She grips your hand so hard you lose feeling for a day and a half. And when it's over, there's this red, squalling creature placed into your arms, screaming like it's personally offended by existence. You name the child after a grandparent, as tradition demands. It's a small child, wrapped in hope and linen. You and your wife look at each other, exhausted, stunned, and smile. A real smile. The kind that feels older than both of you. Life changes overnight. Sleep becomes a myth. Feeding becomes an hour-long ritual. And diapering? Well, medieval diapers were moss, linen, or, if you were poor, nothing at all. Your home smells like smoke, milk, and whatever that baby smell is. It's not bad, just powerful. Like someone fermented cheese and emotion. You see her differently now. Not just your wife, but a mother. Fierce, focused, often tired. You fall in love all over again in new, unexpected ways. Not because of how she looks at you, but how she looks at your child. Like the world just got bigger and scarier and more beautiful all at once. Still, parenthood isn't all candlelit cuddles. There are dangers, fevers, teething, colic, accidents. Every day is a small gamble. And yet, you go on. You take turns. She sings lullabies you've never heard before. You invent silly stories about heroic ducks. You make it work. You're not a perfect couple. But in a village of imperfect couples, you're doing all right. The wheel of the year turns again, and with each pass, your household grows, not just with children. Though there are now 2 sticky-handed little ones wobbling around shouting things that only make sense if you're fluent in baby speak. But with chores, debts, rituals, and the comforting clutter of shared history. You wake up one morning to the sound of her humming a tune you'd long forgotten, stirring porridge while the kids poke a sleeping chicken in the corner. You sit up in bed and realize, this is your life now. And honestly, it's kind of wonderful. Still, as the kids grow, so do the complications. Medieval childhood is short, in every sense. By the age of 5 or 6, children are expected to help out, gathering firewood, feeding animals, or keeping an eye on younger siblings. School isn't common unless you live near a monastery and someone's feeling charitable. For most families, the children's education comes straight from their parents. How to survive, how to be useful, and, most subtly, how to love. So now, you find yourself teaching your child how to tell if an egg's gone bad, while your partner shows them how to sew a clean line. They watch the way you interact, your laughs, your sighs, the way you roll your eyes when she corrects your Latin pronunciation, and they absorb it all. Your relationship becomes their blueprint. Meanwhile, outside your home, the village continues its steady thrum. Some couples thrive. Others crumble. The blacksmith and his wife barely speak anymore, ever since she tried to sell his good tongs for ale money. The baker's daughter married a traveling minstrel, and now half the town predicts doom while the other half secretly wishes they were bold enough to run away with someone who plays the lute. And then there are the rumors. A woman accused of using love potions. A man said to have charmed his neighbor's wife with nothing but a wink and some honey cakes. You'd laugh, except love potions were a thing. Well, sort of. In the medieval imagination, herbs held power. Some were for healing, some for cursing, and some for making someone fall madly in love with you, or at least be less grumpy. A mix of powdered viper tongue, basil, and wine might do the trick. Or perhaps a bit of mandrake root, if you didn't mind risking hallucinations or a visit from the local priest. Historians still argue whether people genuinely believed in these potions or simply used them as social tools, a way to claim power in a world with very little personal control. And while we're on power, let's talk about gender. Marriage in the Middle Ages wasn't always equal. In fact, it usually wasn't. Legally, the man was the head of household, and his word held weight. But in practice, let's just say that behind every grumbling husband was a wife who knew where he left the ledger, where the cheese mold grew best, and which nobleman to avoid at market. You start to notice that most decisions are actually mutual, even if they're disguised as your idea. She knows how to push, when to stay quiet, and how to suggest something with enough ambiguity that, if it goes wrong, it was totally your fault. But also, you're learning to do the same. It's a dance, really. A little push, a little give, with occasional stomps and the occasional delighted spin. Some evenings, when the kids are asleep and the fire's burned low, you sit together in silence. Not awkward silence, the kind that wraps around you like a soft wool blanket. You share roasted chestnuts. She rubs her ankle. You both stare at the flames. And in that quiet, you remember the early days. The awkward first meeting, the too tight wedding tunic, the goat that ate the veil. It feels like someone else's story, but it's yours. It's hers. It's both of yours now. Life, as always, isn't static. Your oldest child is now 9 and already asking too many questions about the Reeves' daughter. The toddler is a walking menace with a taste for dirt and whatever bugs are within reach. And through all of this, you and your wife continue to adapt. The hard days come too. A bad harvest. A fever that leaves you shivering for days. The death of a close friend. The news of war from far-off lands that still manages to rattle your village. In those moments, the strength of your marriage isn't in grand gestures, it's in survival. In the way she tucks another blanket around you without comment. In the way you stagger out of bed, fever be damned, to chop wood because she's already done enough. Medieval couples didn't write long love letters or plan anniversary trips to the coast. But they did give each other their energy, their resilience, and, on the best days, their laughter. Like today. The duck, Sir Quackalot, now ancient and mostly blind, has somehow made it into the pantry again and eaten half a wheel of questionable cheese. Your wife blames you. You blame the child. The child blames the duck. And while chaos unfolds, you find yourself laughing so hard you can't breathe. Even she's giggling as she shoos the duck out with a broom. In that moment, the kitchen, your messy, smoky, cheese-scented kitchen, feels like the heart of the world. And when the sun sets and the kids are tucked in, you lie beside her once more. She's older now. So are you. Her hands are rougher. Your back creaks like an old gate. But you still reach for each other, still share the same breath in the dark. Because love in medieval times, it wasn't about flowers or fancy poetry. It was about laughter, labor, and knowing someone would still be beside you when the candles burned out. The frost has returned. Each breath hangs in the air like a ghost of summer, and every morning, the hearth has to be coaxed back to life before your fingers stop aching. You step outside to check the firewood and notice her footprints in the snow from earlier. Small, determined, and slightly pigeon-toed, like always. She's already been up, already fetched water from the frozen stream, already started the porridge. You smile to yourself. Love, now, is quieter than ever. It's in the way she leaves your boots by the fire so they're warm when you wake. In the mug she presses into your hands without a word. In the extra piece of bread she slips onto your plate when she thinks you're not looking. The days are short in winter, but the nights are long, and sometimes cold in more ways than one. Arguments still happen. Of course they do. You forget to patch the roof before the snow. She spends too much of your coin at market. You snore like a dying ox. She hums that same three-note tune while kneading dough, and it drives you mad. But you've both stopped trying to win arguments. Now you just try to survive them. And somehow, surviving becomes its own kind of romance. Your children are growing fast. The oldest is nearly tall enough to borrow your cloak, and has already stolen your sense of humor. The youngest is still in the phase of inventing wild tales involving dragons, milkmaids, and that poor duck, Sir Quackalot, who's now more legend than bird. You look at these chaotic, beautiful creatures and realize something strange. They're watching. Always. Watching the way you touch her shoulder when she's tired. Watching the way she teases you when your back gives out while hauling potatoes. Watching the way you bicker and laugh and walk together, even if you don't always talk. So you start paying attention too. Because whether you like it or not, you're teaching them what love looks like. And hopefully, it doesn't look like those awkward couples at the fair who barely make eye contact and speak only in muttered complaints about oxen prices. Winter means fewer gatherings, more fireside evenings. You spend your nights telling stories, some true, some absolutely not. She tells the one about how you once tried to impress her by catching a fish with your bare hands, and nearly drowned in a puddle. You retaliate by reminding her of the time she mistook a hedgehog for a baby lamb in the dark. The kids giggle, even though they've heard these stories 100 times. That's part of the magic. Sometimes, though, the magic feels a little harder to summon. You're tired. She's tired. The food is bland. The roof leaks again. And the candle wax has run low. That's when you pull out the old tricks, little things. A carved wooden token left on her pillow. A spontaneous foot rub. A compliment that isn't about her stew. Though yes, the stew is still suspiciously good. And she responds in kind. Mending your shirt, humming your favorite tavern song, touching your hand for just a second longer than necessary. Historians still argue whether medieval couples really felt romantic love, as we understand it today. The idea of marrying for passion was considered foolish by many, something poets wrote about but real people didn't indulge in. Yet, tucked between tax records and land disputes, we find scraps. Notes, wills, gestures in stained glass and carved initials in wooden beams. Tiny whispers that say, yes, we loved. And you do. Even when things are hard. Especially then. Like last week, when the neighboring village caught fire, and families arrived with nothing but the clothes on their backs. You and she didn't even speak. You just moved. Shared food. Made space. Lent blankets. After they left, she sat beside you and cried, not for them, but for how lucky you both were. You held her until her breathing evened out, and she fell asleep with her head against your chest like she used to. Before children, before fences, before responsibilities. The snow piles higher. You build a sled from leftover lumber so the kids can shriek down the nearest hill like banshees. She watches from the doorway, wrapped in every blanket you own, laughing every time one of them crashes into a drift. You take a turn too, purely for structural testing, of course, and end up rolling down sideways, limbs everywhere. She tells you later that you haven't screamed like that since your wedding night. You don't ask for clarification. But even amid the play, there are reminders that time moves fast. You hear of someone in town who lost their partner. A sudden fever, gone in a day. You try not to imagine it, but your mind drifts anyway. What would it be like, walking through the fields without her beside you? Sitting at the table without her humming? Trying to raise these wild children alone? It hits harder than you expect. So that night, you hold her hand while she sleeps. Not in the overly romantic, troubadour way. Just gently, grounding. You memorize the weight of it, the warmth, the rhythm of her breath. The next morning, when she wakes, you don't tell her any of this. Instead, you pretend to complain about the rooster again. She calls you dramatic. You smirk. She smirks back. And you both go on. Because that's what love is now. The soft, worn-in comfort of knowing you're both still choosing each other. Every day. Even when it's not easy. Even when there's nothing poetic about it. And especially when you both smell like onions and goat. There's a joy in surviving. In enduring. In still being here. Together. Spring comes not with a bang, but a sigh. A long, damp breath from the earth that smells of thawed mud, old roots, and sheep who have absolutely no intention of staying in their pen. You trudge through the slush with a repaired boot, counting chickens, swatting at midges, and mentally preparing for the flood of chores that warm weather brings. Your partner, of course, is already 3 steps ahead, literally, standing by the well with a bucket and a disapproving look that says you overslept again. You shrug. She smirks. And like clockwork, the new season begins. With spring comes courtship, but not for you this time. Your oldest child, barely into their teens, is now the subject of glances, giggles, and secret exchanges of dried apple slices behind the chapel. You catch them brushing their hair more often, mumbling songs under their breath, asking odd questions like, "What does it mean when someone gives you a rosemary sprig tied with wool?" You suppress a groan. Here we go. And just like that, you become those parents. The ones with opinions, suspicions, and a terrifying awareness of how easily hearts can break. Your partner pretends to be calm, but you've seen her sharpening the kitchen knife with a little more rhythm lately. You, meanwhile, start accidentally showing up at the same places your child's suitor likes to frequent, just to offer a completely unnecessary comment about, say, the price of barley. Casual, cool, mildly threatening. The village is abuzz. Springtime means planting, cleaning, and most importantly, matchmaking. People whisper about who's walking home with whom, who might be expecting, and who's been left behind. The rituals of dating, or what passes for it, are back in full swing. You watch the process with amusement and a touch of dread. Because dating in medieval times isn't like swiping left or sending emojis. It's messy, public, tangled with expectations. There's the dance of status and reputation, land and livestock. Affection is real, but so is the constant pressure to marry well. Historians still argue whether young people had much choice in their partners. In noble families, the answer was usually no. For commoners, there was a little more room to maneuver, but not much. Parents, neighbors, and even priests had opinions, and those opinions carried weight. Getting caught kissing behind the mill wasn't just scandalous. It could derail negotiations, damage reputations, and in some cases, spark a feud that lasted generations. You remember all this. You lived it. And so now, watching your own child trip over their words and blush at the sight of someone's crooked smile, it's like time is folding in on itself. You find yourself retelling stories you swore you'd never share. Like how you once tried to impress a girl by jumping from the barn roof and broke 2 toes. Or how your wife-to-be tricked you into thinking her family had 12 pigs when they actually only had 4. We just moved them around a lot, she says, deadpan, as your children howl with laughter. The stories make you nostalgic. Not in a sad way. Just aware. Aware of how far you've come. Aware of how love starts and changes and keeps changing. And of how, no matter how much you prepare them, your children will make their own choices. Some smart, some stupid, all human. This spring, a traveling tinker passes through with gossip from distant towns and a few scandalous riddles that send your whole family into snorts and blushes. He mentions a place where young people now exchange tokens. Bits of embroidery, dried flowers, even personal poems. It's all the rage, he says, winking. Love in verse. Your youngest tries writing one. It includes a heroic goose and ends with your hair smells like soup. Not exactly Shakespeare, but you keep it anyway. And then there's the fair. Fairs are chaotic, glorious beasts. Music, food, the clashing stench of sweat and herbs and roasting meat. There are jugglers, fortune-tellers, and more bad decisions being made in a single day than during the entire harvest. You walk through with your partner and children, hands full of honey cakes, hearts full of mischief. Your oldest disappears with that same suitor from earlier. You let them go, just for a while, just until sunset. And in the quiet that follows, you and your wife sit together on a worn bench, watching firelight flicker on faces you don't recognize. You say nothing for a while. Then she nudges your knee with hers. You know, she says, when we first came here, I thought you were going to be unbearably serious. You raise an eyebrow. And I was right, she says, grinning. You laugh. And for a moment, you are both young again. There's a song drifting over from the minstrels, an old one, the kind with lyrics everyone pretends not to know. People are dancing, clapping, tripping over their own feet. You pull her up and drag her into the crowd. She protests, but only a little, and soon you're both moving in that stumbling, joyful way that only comes from years of knowing how the other leans, turns, and holds on tight when the music swells. Later that night, under the stars, you walk home with aching feet and warm cheeks. The children are quiet, half asleep. Your partner squeezes your hand. And just like that, spring begins, not just in the fields, but in the heart. Because even now, after all this time, you're still learning how to love. Still adjusting. Still awkwardly dancing and laughing and messing things up. And, somehow, still getting it mostly right. The summer sun wakes you before the rooster does. It pushes through the cracks in the shutters and paints long streaks of gold across the stone floor. You groan, stretch, and listen to the soft sounds of the house. Someone snoring faintly, the creak of wood, the wind catching a loose shutter. Beside you, your partner is already gone. Not surprising. She always wakes first in the summer, chasing the morning chill away with movement and a purpose that no one has dared question for the past 20 years. You find her outside, sleeves rolled, hair pinned up, coaxing stubborn weeds from between the carrots. She doesn't look up when you approach, just points to the rake and says, "We've got a wasp's nest in the grain shed." So begins another summer day in a long chain of them. Summer, in medieval life, is the season of work. And not just any work, the back-breaking kind. You've never loved sweating through your own shirt while bending over barley in the blazing heat. But here you are, doing exactly that. And so is everyone else. Children fetch water. Elders oversee, and the village becomes a hive of activity, each person part of a strange, sunburnt ballet. But beneath all this toil, there's a kind of romance that's hard to explain. It's in the shared glances when your backs ache in sync. In the moment you pass her a cup of watered wine without her asking. In the way you both collapse on the hay together at dusk, too tired to talk, but still laughing over who tripped in the pigsty. Historians often debate whether medieval couples had time for affection in the summer, with so much to do. But the truth lies in these quiet, unremarkable moments. A joke whispered over the bread dough. A shared berry stolen from the bush and eaten in secret. A kiss that tastes like salt and dust and effort. And then there's the feast days, sweet, sweet interruptions. Summer brings holy days, weddings, and sometimes even a festival or two. These are rare jewels in the work-heavy months, and you treat them accordingly. Your partner bathes in wildflower-scented water the night before. You finally trim your beard. The children complain about tunics and tight shoes, but even they know something special is coming. One feast day, the village gathers in the meadow. There's singing, dancing, and a slightly drunken priest who recites Latin with the flourish of a traveling bard. A couple announces their betrothal. Another couple, married for only a year, is already holding a baby that looks suspiciously like the blacksmith. No one says a word. You and your wife join in the dancing, as always. You've got the rhythm of it now. Turn, step, spin, laugh. She still steps on your foot occasionally, and you pretend to be mortally wounded. She rolls her eyes and offers an exaggerated curtsy. Your children pretend not to know you. Later, as the sun sets and everyone lays back on the grass, someone brings out a lute. The tune is slow, familiar, and a bit mournful. It's one of those love songs that ends in heartbreak, as most of them do. You feel her fingers find yours in the dark. Not tightly, not dramatically, just there, present, like always. But not all love stories in summer end in joy. One evening, you hear news from the next village. 2 lovers caught running away. Their families opposed the match, and now the girl's gone missing. The boy's been fined, whipped, and forbidden from leaving town. Whispers swirl. Some say they're still meeting in secret. Others say she's fled to a convent. Still others claim she's hiding in the woods with a baby and a bow. It sparks debate. Around the fire, you and your partner talk about what you would have done had your parents forbidden your marriage. You'd like to believe you'd have defied them. She, more practical, says she'd have found a clever way around it. Love is patient, she says, but also stubborn. And yet, your own relationship wasn't without obstacles. You remember how her brother thought you were too poor, how your uncle said her family smelled like pickled eels, how you both ignored them, how you traded your last 2 sheep to make the marriage official, how she still teases you that the sheep were probably smarter than you anyway. Summer is also the season of healing. You and she are older now. Your knees crack. Your breath shortens, but the heat loosens the stiffness a little. She massages your shoulders with something made of thyme and goose fat. You pretend it smells good. She pretends your groaning isn't excessive. You both pretend a lot of things, but not the important ones. Sometimes, on very hot nights, neither of you can sleep. So you go outside, lie on the cool ground, and look up at the stars. There's no need to talk. The cicadas are loud enough. But every now and then, you murmur something, a memory, a question, a wish. She replies with a grunt, a chuckle, or silence. It's enough. The stars don't care who you once were. But she does. And you do too. You've both changed, of course. Age has a way of sanding down the rough edges, but also deepening the cracks. She's not the girl you married. And you're not the boy who thought giving her a necklace made from bent nails was romantic. But somehow, what you've built, sunburns, splinters, sore backs and all, feels like a kind of love that the poets couldn't quite capture. You fall asleep beside her, the grass under your back, the heat still lingering in the earth. And tomorrow, you'll do it all again. The long shadows of autumn creep quietly into the village. Mornings grow chilly, and the sharp smell of wood smoke cuts through the air, weaving around the trees that are just starting to shed their leaves like reluctant old men. You wrap your cloak tighter, feeling the familiar ache in your shoulders from months of labor. Your partner is already up, busily sorting through the last of the harvest, humming a tune that reminds you, oddly enough, of a drunken frog. Autumn is a time of reckoning. The fields are empty, the granaries full or nearly so, and the village holds its collective breath for the harsh months ahead. But there's another kind of reckoning happening too, a reckoning of hearts and promises. You watch the younger couples shyly holding hands under apple trees, the secret meetings behind barns, and the nervous glances exchanged at the market. The harvest moon brightens the evenings, casting silver on the stones, on the faces, on the dreams whispered under thick woolen blankets. It's also the season for weddings. You remember your own, the awkward dance, the clumsy kiss, the too tight tunic, and the feast where you ate too much and regretted it for days. Wedding celebrations were a rare chance to cast off the burdens of survival, even if only briefly. Songs were sung, toasts made, and the whole village came alive in a way that had nothing to do with the growing chill. Historians still argue whether medieval weddings were more about love or alliance. For peasants, it often meant a bit of both, joining families, securing land or labor, but also hoping for affection. Nobles? Mostly alliance, with a side of political chess. Either way, the pressure was enormous. You chuckle thinking about the quirky customs that accompanied these unions. Like the bride's treasure tradition, where the groom had to find a hidden token somewhere on the bride's property before the ceremony could begin. Miss it, and the wedding could be delayed or even called off. You once hid the token behind a particularly thorny bush just to see how far your bride would go. Spoiler, she went further than you expected, wielding a pitchfork with alarming precision. Courtship in autumn is different from spring or summer. It's quieter, slower, like the fading light. The urgency of warm months gives way to a cozy closeness. Fires are stoked, stories told. The world outside may be dying back, but inside, the hearth glows and hearts grow fatter with longing. You and your partner settle into this rhythm, weaving your own tales alongside the younger ones. You share advice, you know, the kind no one asked for, about keeping love alive when the nights are long and the days short, about patience, about forgiveness, about the delicate balance between giving and holding on. There's an old wives' tale she likes to quote. If you find a spider in your house during autumn, it means you'll have good luck in love all winter. You never really believed it, but last year, when a spider skittered across your doorstep, you made a wish anyway. Maybe it worked. You glance at the children, now growing into themselves like sturdy oaks, learning their own steps in this ancient dance of affection and family. You wonder what their stories will be. Will they follow tradition or break it? Will they hide tokens behind thorn bushes or write poems under moonlight? Will they dance barefoot in the cold, laughing at the absurdity of it all? You hope so. As the harvest moon rises, you and your partner steal a moment away from the busy kitchen and the chatter of the household. You sit by the fire, hands clasped, watching the flames flicker and dance. The warmth seeps into your bones, a quiet comfort against the creeping cold. Do you remember that time you tried to cook rabbit and nearly set the house on fire? She asks with a mischievous smile. You groan. How could I forget? I still have the scar on my finger to prove it. She laughs, a sound like wind through dry leaves. Somehow, we survived. We always do. Historians still debate whether the medieval concept of romance truly existed or if it was mostly duty and survival dressed up in pretty words. But sitting here, wrapped in a threadbare cloak, sharing a laugh in the glow of dying embers, you know one thing for sure. Love, in all its messy, imperfect glory, was very much alive. And that's enough. Winter arrives with a quiet severity. You awake one morning to a world transformed, frost frosting every blade of grass, smoke curling like lazy serpents from every chimney, and the crunch of frozen earth underfoot. The cold bites at your cheeks and nose, leaving a sharp sting that no amount of wool can fully banish. You pull your cloak tighter, knowing that the long, dark months ahead will test not just your body, but your spirit. Dating in winter is a whole different challenge. The sun rises late and sets early, so your chances for stolen moments outdoors are few and fleeting. The village feels smaller, cozier, but also heavier with the weight of scarcity and anticipation. Fires burn low, food stores dwindle, patience thins. Yet, the frost brings with it its own kind of intimacy. Inside small, drafty homes, couples huddle close to share warmth and whispered words. The idea of romance in winter may sound bleak, but there's a certain magic to it, like the soft glow of a candle flickering against stone walls or the way breath clouds mingle in the cold air before a shy kiss. One curious tradition that thrives in winter is the wassailing ritual, meant to protect apple trees and encourage a fruitful harvest next year. But it also doubles as a social event, with singing, feasting, and plenty of ale flowing to warm more than just bodies. You recall joining the noisy group last year, half drunk and trying to remember the words to an old ballad. Your partner's laughter rang louder than the rest, a reminder that even in the darkest months, joy could be found. Historians still argue whether wassailing was more pagan ritual or a Christianized custom. But either way, it became a festive excuse for courtship and community bonding. Winter also sharpens the edges of desire and longing. You remember nights when snow trapped you indoors for days, turning the house into a pressure cooker of restlessness. The fire was your only distraction, and sometimes, you'd catch yourself watching your partner with a kind of quiet wonder. How her hair caught the flickering light, how her breath steamed in the cold air, how even the humblest smile could feel like a gift. The scarcity outside seems to concentrate the abundance inside. But there are darker notes too. Cold weather breeds illness, and sickness spreads fast in crowded homes. You've heard of lovers separated by quarantine or worse. The fear of loss lingers in every cough and fever. And yet, even in the face of such threats, people cling to each other, finding comfort in touch when the world outside feels hostile. You think back to a story told by an elder about a couple who kept their vows through a harsh plague winter. They stayed locked inside, surviving on scraps and each other's strength. When spring finally returned, they emerged, scarred but unbroken, a testament to resilience and love's stubborn will. Speaking of stubborn, you recall the peculiar practice of posy rings during winter betrothals. Small rings with flowers carved in wood or metal, exchanged as tokens of promise. The idea was that the flower's meaning would speak louder than words. You gave your partner one shaped like a violet, symbolizing faithfulness, and she still wears it hidden beneath her sleeve. You smile, remembering how she pretended to lose it just to tease you. Winter may seem like a time to hunker down and survive, but it's also a season where love is tested and proven. The long nights force honesty and closeness. The chill encourages tenderness. The stories, whispered by firelight, remind you that even when the world feels frozen, the heart beats warm. And sometimes, that's enough to keep you going until spring. Spring arrives with a promise that feels like a sigh after months of holding your breath. You notice it first in the light, the way dawn stretches longer, brushing pale pinks and blues across the sky, and then in the scent, faint but unmistakable, of damp earth and blooming flowers. The village shakes off its winter sleep, groaning and stretching like an old man waking from a long nap. Your partner and you find yourselves outside more often, drawn by the gentler sun and the burst of life in the fields. The air is thick with possibility, and the world feels less like a cage and more like an invitation. Spring in medieval times was a season of hope, but also uncertainty. Crops might thrive, or they might not. Livestock might be healthy, or vulnerable. But for love, it was a season of new beginnings and secret meetings. You remember the old custom of Maying, where young couples would venture into the woods or fields to celebrate the arrival of spring. It was a blend of pagan ritual and community festivity, with dancing around the maypole, crowning a queen of May, and yes, quite a bit of flirtation. You and your partner once stole away for a private Maying under a blooming hawthorn tree, where laughter mingled with the buzz of bees and the faint rustle of leaves. Historians still argue whether May Day celebrations were primarily fertility rites or simple village fun. But either way, they were a rare chance to shed the strictures of daily life and indulge in youthful playfulness. Spring courting could be as subtle as the first blush on a cheek or as bold as a hand brushed deliberately over a sleeve. Letters were sometimes exchanged, ink and parchment carrying hope, teasing, or longing. You recall the thrill of receiving one from your partner, the neat script folding open like a secret promise. In a world without texting or calls, a letter was a treasure, a tangible touch across distance. There was also the risk. Letters could be intercepted, leading to scandal or worse. You both laughed once at the idea of a medieval read receipt, picturing your letter carrier rolling his eyes at your overly poetic scribbles. Springtime also meant weddings resumed with renewed vigor. After the scarcity and cold of winter, families were eager to celebrate, to bind alliances, and to dream of future harvests and offspring. You remember watching the bridal party set off down the dusty road, the bride's veil catching the sunlight, and the groom's nervous smile betraying his usual confidence. Not every match was perfect, though. You and your partner shared stories of mismatched couples, some forced, some chosen, who tried to weather the storm of expectation. You both agreed that love was rarely the fairy tale in the songs, but it could be found in the everyday acts of care, like sharing a blanket on a chilly evening or standing guard during a village raid. One peculiar spring custom you recall is the hand-fasting ceremony, a kind of trial marriage lasting a year and a day. It was a chance to test compatibility before full commitment. You always thought it sounded more like a medieval version of a Netflix and chill period. Minus the Netflix, obviously. The real magic of spring, you find, is in the quiet moments, the stolen glances at market stalls, the shared breath in cool mornings, the subtle brush of fingers beneath the dappled light of budding trees. The world is waking up, and so are you. As the days lengthen, you feel a restlessness stirring, an eagerness for growth, for change, for something beyond survival. Love, after all, is not just about weathering the storms but dancing in the sunlight when it breaks through. You lean into this season of renewal, knowing that each spring brings its own challenges, joys, and stories waiting to be told. Summer bursts onto the scene like an overexcited troubadour, full of energy, noise, and way too much sweat. The sun climbs high and lingers late, painting the village in golden light and baking the dirt paths until they're cracked like old parchment. You wipe the grime from your brow, squinting against the glare as the world hums with the relentless buzz of life. It's a time for festivals, for fairs, and, of course, for dating with all the passionate awkwardness and bravado that midsummer can inspire. The medieval summer was when courtship reached its peak, fueled by long days and even longer nights. You recall the excitement of summer fairs, bursting with colors, the smell of roasting meat, the cries of vendors hawking everything from spiced pies to hand-forged trinkets. Music spills out from every corner, lutes and pipes weaving together a soundtrack that gets into your bones. These fairs were prime hunting grounds for love, or at least for those chasing a bit of flirtation and fun. You remember sneaking away during one fair, hearts pounding as you navigated the crowded streets, the smell of hay and sweat thick in the air. The heat made everyone more reckless, more willing to risk a hand held too long or a glance that lingered just a second too much. There was a daring in summer love, a feeling that anything could happen before the season ended and life went back to the grind. Historians still argue how much genuine romantic freedom common folk really had during these times, versus how much was still controlled by family duty and economic necessity. But at fairs, the rules loosened, just a little, and that meant something. One quirky medieval flirtation ritual you might find amusing is the cucking stool threat, basically a public shaming chair for scolds or gossiping women. While not exactly romantic, it shows the odd ways society policed relationships and behavior. You once joked with your partner that you'd hide her in the hay if anyone tried that stunt on her, though you suspect she'd just find a way to outwit the whole town. Summer's heat also brought on a host of remedies and superstitions. You recall the bizarre use of crocodile dung as sunscreen, which might explain why some medieval skins had a certain rustic charm. You think about how, despite such oddities, people still found ways to enjoy themselves, to woo each other, and to dream. As midsummer approached, there were often special celebrations around St. John's Eve. Bonfires lit to ward off evil spirits and to celebrate fertility and renewal. You and your partner joined the village's circle, watching flames leap and crackle, the faces around you glowing in firelight. It was a night filled with whispered promises and laughter that echoed long after the embers died. Summer love was fast, fierce, and sometimes fleeting, but it left marks, stories, memories, scars, and laughter. You recall how your own summer romance bloomed in that heat, awkward, exhilarating, imperfect, and entirely unforgettable. Now, as the sun sets on this tale, you feel the warmth of those days lingering in your chest, a reminder that no matter the century, love in all its forms is a wild, wonderful, sometimes ridiculous adventure. You lean back, the story winding down like a soft lullaby. The echoes of laughter and whispers fade into a gentle hum, the flicker of ancient fires growing dim. The world outside quiets, the harsh edges softened by memory and time. Know that no matter how distant the past may seem, the heart's desire remains timeless, messy, hopeful, stubborn. You've walked through seasons of longing and promise, of awkward beginnings and tender endurance, all woven into the tapestry of human experience. So, as you close your eyes, let the warmth of those stories wrap around you like a well-worn cloak, familiar and comforting. Let the gentle rhythm of history soothe your mind, and may the soft hum of the night carry you into peaceful dreams. Good night, and sweet dreams.